Hi, thank you for coming. Welcome to my session. It's Rising to the Challenge, which is a cute play on our name, Rizing, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And what I'm going to talk about today is how the Chef stacks basically enabled us to be able to install and configure SAP S/4HANA. Let me grab this. Okay, so that says the exact same thing as the other slide. So I'll first start out by just introducing who we are, who Rizing is, get a little context on who I am. Then I'll talk about SAP S/4HANA. I'm assuming most people know about SAP in this room, but maybe not. So we'll just kind of level set on what that is and what it does. Then we'll talk about why this is important. So what's really the business driver behind this for our company? Then we'll get a little bit into the meat of how did we do it. So what are the steps that we took? What kind of scripts did we write? And how does it work? And then hopefully I'll have time for a little bit of Q&A at the end. Since it's such a small group, I'm certain we can answer any of your questions. So we'll start out with a little description of who is Rizing. So we are an SAP professional services company. We're headquartered in Stamford, Connecticut, and we have operations around the world. Basically, our major offices are in Rotterdam, Singapore, and Melbourne. So we kind of operate in a number of different continents and businesses. Our main three focuses, and we're SAP only, right? So that's all we do, are SAP Enterprise Asset Management, and I'll talk about that and define what I mean by Enterprise Asset Management. And that's really my main focus today. And you also hear me call that Vesta, because that was the name of that business before we kind of merged together with these other businesses. The other branch we have is Human Resources Consulting, principally SuccessFactors, which is SAP's cloud-based HR platform. And then we have a retail practice as well, who works with some retail companies. Some of them are listed over there on the right-hand side. So as you can see from our kind of race car slide over here, we work with a lot of big companies. Obviously, this isn't all-inclusive, but we work with Fortune, Global 1000 scale companies and things like that mostly. And our practice is a bit synergistic. So a lot of these customers are actually customers of one or two of our consulting divisions. We also have a very good relationship with SAP, so we're an SAP Premier Partner, and again, all we do is SAP. So they really appreciate that and bring a lot of customers to us. So I'm assuming, just show of hands, everybody knows what SAP is, like the company, because if you don't, they're basically the largest European software company. But just to level set a little bit, an ERP system, essentially, and that's what we're going to talk about. SAP sells a ton of things, right? So they have business objects, they have Concur for expenses, they have SuccessFactors for HR. But what we're going to talk about today is their core ERP system. And an ERP system is essentially, I guess it could be described as an operating system for a business. It integrates all the different functions that you might have, so finance, manufacturing, supply chain, maintenance, et cetera, and let you kind of have the idea is that lets you have one holistic view of your business and what's going on. So S/4HANA is the latest release and builds upon and modernizes the previous versions. So SAP's been around a while, as you can see from this screen history I'll pull up here. It started out as a green screen application running on mainframes, AS400s, that type of thing. And then they really took off probably in about the 90s, aughts, with client-server kind of computing with Windows clients and Unix server backends, Solaris, et cetera. That's when they really hit a strong growth spurt, and that's from whence a lot of our customers' implementations actually date is quite old. And of course, they evolved along with the rest of kind of the software trends. So they introduced a web server and started putting some more of their things into HTML. And of course, one thing that you learn very quickly if you work with SAP is that they have a terrible case of not invented here syndrome. So it was not good enough to use somebody else's web server. They had to invent their own web server. So they tend to do that a lot. They've actually become much better about this of late and tend to take more outside ideas in. But certainly, 10, 15 years ago, they were very autarkic, right? They'd build everything they needed themselves. So S/4HANA is the latest release and builds upon and modernizes the previous version. So now they've kind of caught up to where everyone else is, right? So the user experience now is, it's called UI5, or Fiori, based on UI5, which is your standard HTML5, cascading style sheets, JavaScript kind of application. And the idea is that S4's modernized a lot of things too, not just the user experience, but also some of the IT infrastructure. They've kind of streamlined this. They've streamlined a lot of the abilities to kind of work across different silos of information. And the idea is that this is going to improve agility and the ability of businesses to react. So S/4HANA architecture itself, so just a big, blocky picture of this. There's a lot to it. Of course, you could get very detailed here. But it has a very kind of canonical enterprise three-tier design to it, still to this day. The big changes recently, of course, are at the lower end, at the bottom here. They used to support any database. So SAP used to support Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, et cetera. With this latest version, they only support SAP HANA. So that's kind of a big fundamental change to that's going to impact many customers who happen to run it on a different database. Within that, you have the database tables that store all your enterprise data. And then in the middle tier, they have an application server. In their case, of course, it's written in there, or it uses their own language. It's actually written in C, but it uses their own language called ABAP to define your transaction logic and configuration and things there. And then, on the top tier, they have modernized that, and now they have what they call the Fiori shell, and that allows you to create sort of a cockpit or dashboard kind of interface for people that can embed all the different user experiences, right? So they have UI5, which is the new stuff, but you also might see some of the Web Dim Pro, which is their HTML5, and the SAP GUI, that old Windows application, that's still alive and kicking. A lot of people still use that, and you kind of wrap that up into one sort of display. So that's sort of what it looks like, and there's obviously a lot more complexity to that, but just a little overview there. So I promised I'd describe what we mean by enterprise asset management, because this is really the business that we focused this solution on. And enterprise asset management basically means support for the entire life cycle of, including maintenance, of physical assets. So things that are actually real stuff in the real world. So when I say assets, I don't mean stocks and bonds. I mean rail cars and pumps. And basically, it's kind of divided up into three sort of tiers of assets. So fixed plants, this is what you'd expect, right? So this is an oil refinery or a power generation plant or a manufacturing plant, right? So those are one location that has a lot of complex stuff inside of it that you need to maintain and keep running because it makes you money. Linear assets, so these are things like railways or roads or pipelines or transmission lines that take power from one section of the country to another. What's unique about those is typically you maintain those in increments, right? So you maintain your track from kilometer 5 to kilometer 15, and you want to be able to establish a cost and what you're doing there and maybe a speed and understand different characteristics about that specific section of track. So there's functionality in enterprise asset management to help you do that. Mobile and fixed fleet assets, so these are the things that you'd think about as a fleet, right? So trucks or vans, things like that, but also things that most people don't think of as a fleet. So for example, if you've ever seen the distribution transformers that are up on telephone poles, those are actually managed somewhat as a fleet because they're very interchangeable and they're the same all over the place, and you want to make sure they operate and are maintained accordingly. So an EAM solution, specifically SAP, but there are others out there, but SAP is generally considered to be the market leader in this space, provides functionality for work planning and scheduling. So this is one area that, of course, automation and tools like Chef can kind of reduce the need for headcount in some ways, but you still have to have people out there turning the wrenches and fixing the poles and doing that kind of thing. So planning and scheduling their work is an important characteristic. Maintenance history, so what have we done? How much does it cost us? That type of thing. Inventory and procurement, so MRO parts, as they call them, are actually a huge area of expense for a lot of these companies. If you've ever seen a yard out there that has that's owned by a utility company, they'll have 150 transformers, all kinds of different conduit, and this, that, and the other just sitting out there. Costs some money to hold that, right? They need to keep track of it, make sure that they're turning it over and using it effectively. So that's an important aspect of it. As well as basic financial management, some things to understand what costs what, and then HR functions. So these are vital, especially because a lot of these businesses are kind of dangerous, right? So if you're going to do a hot weld on in a refinery, you need to make sure that that person who's doing it is certified, properly trained, and has all the proper clearances to actually do that work. So all those things are wrapped up together, and again, this extrapolates from a lot of the other elements of the ERP to pull it all together into one thing. And that's what we do. So that's what Vesta or Rizing consults on. And what we've created along the years is what we call Codex, which is our point of view on how to do these things, right? So we've packaged this up as a pre-configured solution that, in SAP terms, if you're familiar with that, is a set of transports and configuration, master data, all that kind of stuff that we've bundled up together that represents our understanding of the best way to operate a utility, a distribution power utility, or an oil and gas refinery. And so what this allows us to do is, of course, deliver a much quicker time to value to our customers, where they can, instead of starting from scratch, we can bring them in at a higher level. And this is a bit more than just configuration of master data. We also have some of our own products that we've written that help with a lot of the integrations and some of the other odds and ends here. So we've put a lot into this, and we wanted to get a lot out of it. So we have some challenges, right? So the business challenges that we face when we're talking about Codex are, how do we show this to people, right? So one of the things, there's lots of people out there who are SAP consultants. You don't have to have a license, right? You can just hang up a shingle and say, hey, I'm an SAP consultant, right? So we need to be able to establish a key differentiator for us, which is being able to show people, this is how you can run your plant, right? This is a better way to do it. This is how, this is an important thing for you to be able to cut costs and be more efficient. And so our ability to show this has really been, this is how we sell, right? We sell by demo, which is a little unusual sometimes in the SAP space. But SAP loves it because they know that we can come in and we can show their products quite well. So they put us in front of a lot of customers, and that helps drive our business. The problem is that this is a very difficult and time-consuming task. Even with our great base and our strong understanding, all the runbooks that we have to install and configure SAP, there's a lot of manual and error-prone steps, right? So we figured that at a minimum, this probably takes us about 2 days of labor to put together. And that's across a couple different skilled people who are skilled SAP administrators. So we have to have somebody install the operating system, set the file system, blah, 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 blah. So there's a lot of steps, a couple of handoffs, and it takes us time to do this, and it takes us a lot of effort. So this is a business challenge we had. The other challenge is more kind of direct and obvious, but if we have this great set of practices and processes and a business case built on lower risk and better TCO, things like that, we need to be able to actually deliver this, right? So we need to be able to take this into a customer and say, here you go, and here's how it's going to work. So we need to be able to stand up a system quickly and have with low risk. And the key to this really is to have a repeatable process that you can do over and over again, but that also provides enough flexibility to meet customer requirements, right? So, we understand that something like Codex is a great start, but it's not the finish point, right? It's pretty much an entry point for them to say, yes, we love this, and we want to move ahead with it, but we want it to work in the way we want to work. Everyone wants to do something a little different, especially these big customers. So we started this initiative to work with the Chef stack based on what I call our big, hairy, audacious goal, right? Hat tip to a guy named Jim Collins, who wrote a book called Built to Last, where that concept came up. Most business books, I think, are not worth reading and kind of anecdotal and nonsense, but this is a good one, I think. Anyway, our big, hairy, audacious goal here was to be able to deploy a complete and secure SAP HANA Codex system with selected configuration and representative data within an hour. And this was something that we thought, I don't think that's possible, right? But we wanted to challenge ourselves. We wanted to say, can we actually do this? And a lot of people in the field were like, you can't do that. There's no way. How are you going to go through the run book faster? How are you going to make sure that you're able to do all the steps that I know you can't automate? And so we had to figure out how to address this challenge. How could we possibly do this, right? So we couldn't just, we have a great team in Malaysia that we've staffed up that's really, really good at this stuff. But I can't hire 100 people and have them write one line of code each, right? So there's no way to do it by working harder, right? We had to work smarter. We had to think of a different way to do it. And so what we found was Chef came to the rescue here, basically. So essentially what we did working with the Chef stack and the Chef team was created a pipeline that allows us to turn all that configuration and code that we have into a working system on AWS, right? So this is kind of the canonical way you work through things with the concept of infrastructure as code, right? So you put it all in GitHub and you do your pull requests and all that to maintain, what are we going to do here? And then you run it through your tools here. So these are the older names, of course, because I don't work for Chef, so I can call them whatever I want, right? But so we have, but we use all of these, and for the purposes, that they each fit a purpose, right? So they're like their own little ecosystem together. And I'll talk about how we put it all together. So, as I said, each tool has a different responsibility. And again, I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we came to this as complete novices, right? I mean, we'd never thought about doing infrastructure as code before at all. It wasn't something that had really come to our minds in any kind of organized fashion, right? So we had no idea what we were doing, basically. And when we started working with the Chef team, what I really liked about it was they were very patient with us and said, no, you don't want to type. You don't want to get in there and do any manual steps. We want to get rid of all the manual steps. I'm like, how can we do that? And it turns out, you just have to use the tools for what they're good for and then figure out how you can put them together into an effective process. So one of the tools that was suggested, of course, was Terraform. So we use that to actually do the construction of the infrastructure on AWS. For now, that's where we started, is in AWS. And that is sort of, I would call it, kind of the instigator of the whole process for us, right? And we use Habitat to manage the dependencies. We started out kind of with this. I didn't really understand what Habitat was when it was first introduced to me. I was like, I don't get it. So you can package something up and it has all its dependencies and they're separated, but you don't compile this application, So how is this going to work for us? And what we really landed on working with the Chef team was not managing the dependencies of the HANA database itself, but managing the dependencies of the install, right? And understanding how we can decompose that into something that was tractable that we could then automate. So that was, to me at least, kind of a breakthrough. Then we use Chef Infra now, right? But Chef, as they say, to install and configure the SAP applications. And then InSpec to configure and secure the operating system. So this was something else that we kind of came across as it wasn't really part of necessarily our goal, but as we started to understand, well, if we're going to do this, we can actually get this almost for free, if you will, where you can establish a consistent system, it's hard to say, and also prove that, right, and have it constantly monitored and maintained through Automate. So Automate was something also that we weren't necessarily thinking about in this, but has actually turned out to be kind of a really nice blessing for us. Okay, and we entered into this process, right, the kind of process that you do follow here. So it was a write, build, deploy, have it break, blow up, smash your head into the wall a few times, go back to the top, write, build, deploy. And then, we went through iterations of this back and forth until finally we, were able to get all the way through it. And now we have this working all the way through every time consistently, right? So now this gives us a lot more flexibility and ability to move ahead. So let me just talk a little bit about how we used each tool, like just to get into a little bit more detail. So the infrastructure I mentioned was created by Terraform, obviously not a Chef tool, but HashiCorp Terraform. So for this, and I have what I'd just call a little snippets of the code over to the right here that just kind of show a little bit of it. But so this creates our AWS instance and configures it. So one thing that the HANA database needs is a very specific disk layout and things like that, right? So you needed to go in and I remember, we had a run book and the administrator would go in and create a system and go through all that, and it's so nice. You just click go, basically, and builds it for you. And this also installs and starts the Habitat supervisor, right? So we basically download a script, run it, so that's down at the bottom there, and then starts the supervisor, creates the systemd entries, and does all that stuff for us. Then from there, installs the Hab packages, gets the cert for Automate. So our Automate server, we don't have like a real certificate. We just have the self-signed certificate there. So we have to pull down that certificate so we can register the server with Automate. And then we start running these services, the installation services for HANA, as well as the compliance services to make sure everything's shipshape. So that's how we use Terraform. Then in Habitat, we use that to manage the dependencies around the install, right? So again, that was sort of something that took me a while to wrap my head around. So instead of, we don't really handle the dependency, we don't try to decompose the HANA database itself. Instead, we decompose the installation and kind of ran that as a whole. I mean, you lose some benefits, I think, of Habitat doing that, but you got to make it work, right? So we did what we had to. And we used what I guess is now called the effortless infrastructure pattern, right? So at the time, it was called Habachef, which is a name I like a lot better. So if I say Habachef, again, I don't work for Chef, so I can call it whatever I want, right? But in that, the Chef client is bundled in with your Habitat packages, and you use policy files to ensure that you have the correct cookbooks in there, and everything's ready to go, ready to run. Then you have the supervisor execute Chef client, and away you go, right? So it just executes it locally. And you don't need a Chef server. So again, coming to this new, so I hadn't touched Chef before a little bit after, maybe less than a year ago. So to me, people talk about a Chef server, and I'm like, what's that? Or they talk about, the roles and all this other stuff, and I'm like, what's that? I don't know any better or worse, I guess. So, started straight out using policy files and kind of this pattern. And it just made it really easy, right? So at the time, there was some baseline scaffolding for this. So you see how we have our own origin in there, Sunstrom scaffolding Chef, because we had to do some extensions to it, because this was done kind of when the pattern was still heavily evolving. And that actually does everything you need right there. So you don't have to create something super elaborate, but we did make some modifications in there at the time. I believe, based on what I've looked at now, we could actually move that to the core scaffolding. Yeah, that's what I'm assuming. Thank you, Sandra. And we're gonna go ahead and do that. That's part of the future state. So anyway, so that's what you need to do. And the beauty of this is that, and this is, again, I've sort of shortened it a bit, but really that's all your plan needs to have to execute this. It's quite nice. Well, one thing to note about Habitat too is that, so right here I'm talking about the HANA deployment. We did for some of the data deployment, we found that, and I just looked at Sandra and this is why I thought of it. We found that we wanted to use a library, SAP, there's an SAP library out there that'll let you call remote function calls from Python, right? And we wanted to use that to load some of the data later. But what we found was when we tried to run it out of the core Python 3.7 module, flame, glass fragments, didn't work, you know, what's going on here? And it turns out that it required a little flag to be set there. So what we actually did there was created our own Habitat package to recompile it with that flag set, and works, you know, puts it in the same system. So now we have installed alongside it the proper version of Python that has the right flag set. So we did do some of that kind of compilation functional stuff that kind of Habitat at least seems intended to, but we also used it in kind of a bit of a novel way as well. So policy files, again, I'm not a super deep chef expert here, but apparently they're goodness, but I don't know any different. So, but basically, you know, you use that to establish, you know, what happens and what gets applied by the chef client. So the supervisor runs all these things periodically and reports to Chef Automate. So if we want to update something, add a new cookbook to this, or add something new to it, what we'd do is just rebuild the package, right? And the server would pick it up and then run it against the system. So it's a real easy way to keep things up to date. I've actually had some good ideas about how we might extend and use that to apply patches in SAP. We haven't done that yet, but that's something we've been thinking about. So for the actual install recipe, it was a little complicated, but we managed to make it work. So the install steps we have, so we take a version, we download a version of, because you have to download things from SAP to be able to install them. So we download a specific version of the HANA database, and we put it into an S3 bucket, right? So we have it kind of set aside. Then what the install recipe does basically is downloads the bits from the bucket, and then we untar it and all that stuff. And then we take some parameters. So we have some parameters that we can set within the runtime of this. For this one, we've kind of, since we're doing more of a demo system, we've just sort of left this fairly static, but we pass those in. The config file is created and then passed into the execute, the setup code, right? So we can parameterize, we can change some of the parameters there just by changing things in the properties of the Habitat package. And we run the installer, and it takes about 8 minutes. This is amazing, and that's including some of the time to to get the hardware deployed, which seems to vary a bit. But yeah, it takes us about 8 minutes now to install a HANA database, from soup to nuts, basically, doing this. The S4 install is similar. It's just a lot more stuff, right? So that has a database packaged up in it, which can be quite large. And I'll talk a little bit more about the database in a bit. But it's kind of a similar approach, right? Except for it takes about 40 minutes. So if you add those up, we're at 48 minutes. It's not bad. And then we have a few minutes around the edges, right, to load data and apply the configuration and things like that. But basically, it gets in just under that hour mark. So here I just have, and this is kind of demoing this is kind of hard, but I figured I'd just sort of walk through some of the steps that we took. Let me see if I can get this to go. So this is just basically a screen recording, and I'll skip ahead on this one a bit because it's not that exciting to see. But so what we do, you do Terraform apply. It goes ahead, and I've redacted this a bit just to kind of shorten it up. And then I'll have to type yes here to make it go. But this was just in one of our kind of demo areas. So then it goes in, creates this thing. Can I skip ahead a bit? That would be nice. Where's my control? Anyway, so it goes in, applies everything. The interesting thing about this is that you actually see all these steps take place within the Terraform output. So this is, I'm just running this on the command line of a Linux box that we have kind of adjacent to the one we're installing on. And it goes out, starts to do all the HANA instance creation and things. It goes through the scripts. It does it all. Again, not a super exciting demo really, but it just goes to show, if you watch it, you can see all the different steps happen. And if I could skip through it, I would love to do that, because otherwise I don't want to waste a lot of time on this, because it's kind of boring. Let's see, can I? No. Okay, well, we'll just proceed. So anyway, it does work. I just wanted to prove it. If we went and watched it, oops, let me go ahead one. How do I go to the next slide? There we go. Okay, so if we watch the whole thing go through, it would basically do all the steps I described, a couple other things that I always forget to talk about. But it goes in and applies all the steps. And actually, the interesting part at the end is I show an automate. Automate, of course, records the run and has the runtime in there. And it's right under an hour, which is always the nice thing. And then it also runs the compliance scans and all that. So you have all that information about a system you just set up, just right there, right at your fingertips. So it's great stuff. And again, I wasn't really counting on using Automate, but now that we have it, I think we really like it. So today, what do we have? We have all this stuff over on the left. So we create we can, although I just used the same one that we had, but we can create all the AWS stuff we need, right, using Terraform. We install and configure the SUSE Linux that's required to run the HANA database. We install the HANA database, we install S4, and then we apply the codecs configuration, right? So that includes, we run transports through from the command line. So that's something that you'd see if I went through the whole demo. It loads up some data. We just have some sample data that we're loading up in there. And then, that's where we are now. So this year, we're hoping to do a couple things. One of them is refactor to kind of get it back towards standards, right? So we want to use, the core scaffolding and things like that. There's a couple things that we did that were done. We were iterating through this pretty heavily, and there's a few things that we just want to clean up and kind of make a bit more clear and things, right? I mean, any code you write, you look at it a year later, and you're like, what? What was I thinking? So, we'll start on that process. Plus, it'll be a great opportunity for, when we first did this, most of the heavy lifting was carried by the chef team, but I think we're ready to take it on now and really do a lot of the refactor ourselves. We want to complete the data load. So right now, we just focused on a few kind of narrow things that we wanted to load up to prove the point. And that might extend our time a bit, but still, I think we're still within our BHAG of an hour getting it up and running. Enable for different cloud platforms. So that's something that we've talked about a bit, just to diversify ourselves a little bit. We have lots of customers who use Azure, and so we'd like to be able to support that as well. Again, right now we're mostly doing it internally for demonstration purposes, but we'd like to be able to push this out and deliver it to customers as well. And then extend the industry configurations. So we started out with utilities, which is our principal industry focus, but we already have definitions for oil and gas and what else? Telecom and something else kind of ready to go that we've queued up and can put those in. So that's just a set of different SAP transports, so that just sets the system up a little differently, different master data. And then the future directions, something that I would personally love to see is some type of front end to this, so we could create a config menu where a consultant of ours could go in and say, hey, I need a oil and gas system and I want this data, put their data in, and and they could just hit go, and we wouldn't have to do anything, right? We wouldn't have to, thank you. We wouldn't have to touch the system, or we wouldn't have to interact with people. Wouldn't that be great? No. But that would allow them to, because we do operate around the world, and sometimes it can, be a little difficult for us to coordinate with people in Australia and things to properly get these things orchestrated. So that would be great. And the other aspect I didn't really talk about too much, but I showed in the codex part was one of our primary differentiators as well is, and I talked about the linear assets, we're really, really good at that. And we understand how to integrate with GIS systems quite well. And that's actually how we do a lot of these things. So I want to extend this to incorporate installing, would probably go with Esri, because Esri can run on HANA. Would install a GIS alongside it and do the stitching needed to tie those together. So then people could have like a full system landscape that they'd need to actually operate. And then whatever comes up, because now we have a great baseline that we can move ahead with. We're not wasting time, doing the same things over and over again at the keyboard. We can now invest in moving ahead, which is fantastic. So in summary, we wanted to install and configure SAP S4 HANA Codex in an hour, which we achieved by using Chef Infra, Habitat, InSpec, and Automate, right? So that those tools really helped us achieve our goal. We couldn't have done it any other way, really. I think a huge lesson learned for me was that we learned better ways to do things and really changed our thinking about infrastructure. So now we're considering ways to just broaden this across other things we do internally and otherwise that we've really caught the bug of we don't want to put our hands on the keyboards. We want to write the code, deploy it, test it, and then sit back and watch it work, right? So that's really one of the bigger things I think that we got out of this whole endeavor. And we plan to extend this solution to cover more use cases, right? So I described a few of those. And that is my presentation. And I'd be happy to take any questions. You guys survived. I didn't see anybody sleeping out there, so that's pretty good for a post-lunch nice day. Okay, everything? Yeah, sure.
You mentioned patching. I know I'm not an expert in HANA. Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. But you had mentioned patching earlier, and I know patching in SAP is not the easiest thing in the world to do.
Right.
Have you started to think through how you actually do that? It is more for my edifice.
Yeah, no, actually, we do. So what we created was a simple way to, and it's just shell script, basically. What we did was you can run SAP transports, which are how patches are generally delivered on a transport. And so if they're the transport-only patches, we kind of have a way of doing that. And we actually do apply a few of those during this process. But there are the nut we can't quite solve yet is there are some patches that require manual intervention, and we haven't figured out, okay, how would we actually approach that? And there just might not be a way to do it, because some of them require you to go in and, again, SAP loves the manual intervention for some reason. So, but that's a great question, because it is a tough challenge.
Okay, that's good.
Sorry, I'm standing. I need to be. Anyway,
okay.
Just a question in regards to how long did it take you from start to finish to manage the project from like the conceptualization of what needs to be done to like your initial stage one?
Right. It really took us, I'm going to say, we had some we had some starts and stops in there, right? But we first engaged, started working with Chef directly end of last year, and probably took us a total, like including their work and our work, it was probably about 3 months elapsed before we finished it. But it wasn't, I think we could have done it faster had we just said, okay, all in, let's jump in. So and then some intervening time there. But a lot of that time actually was needed because we needed to figure out what the heck we were doing, right? And so, yeah.
Sure. And another question is, who is your partner that you worked with? In other words, your representation at Chef, who can I call?
Well, Sandra's right here. We work with Sandra. So,
okay, sure.
No, they were fantastic. It really was a great working relationship, I found, because we really know SAP well, so we came to it from that angle, and they really knew their tools well and what we were trying to do, and we brought it together, and I think we made something that's pretty interesting and novel. So,
Thank you.
yep, you're welcome. All right. You're free to enjoy your day now. Apply the SPF, though, before you go outside.